Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the Mindset Check podcast. I'm your host, Misha McKittrick. This is a podcast where we believe that as you take time for a mindset check, you have more power than you think you do. And where we also believe that as you listen to your loved ones, you actually change the trajectory of their life. Before we jump into today's podcast episode, I want to just give you a little bit of a tip that is really, really simple, but I found that it really helps me. So where I live, we typically get warm weather the first 2 weeks of February. And then it gets cold again, really cold. I mean, cold for here. We live in Southern Utah and we have more of a desert climate. And so the weather on average is warmer here than a lot of places in the world, right? But there is a lot of value in knowing what is typical of the weather patterns where you live. Because now that I know that it gets warm for 2 weeks in February, I make sure that I really get out and I get some sunshine. I go for hikes. I really absorb that. And then when it gets cold, again, I put back on my hoodies, on my sweaters, right? And I bundle back up again. And it's almost like it gave me a little bit of a charge to go through the rest of the cold that's coming up. I also just really love the idea of like in spring, checking the weather every day and dressing appropriately based on the weather. Because there's nothing worse than like dressing for a cold day and it's actually a warm day. And then you are not really enjoying the fact that it was actually a warm day. I know it sounds silly, but it actually really does contribute to your life. So knowing the weather patterns and what typically happens around the place that you live, and also being able to check the weather so that you know what to expect. And if you know it's going to be a really beautiful weekend, make sure that you get outside and absorb the sunshine and absorb that goodness so that you kind of have that charge and you used that really good weather wisely. And I feel like it just gives you so much more vitamin D and it allows you to fully be present in the season that you're in and be okay with it versus being like, oh my word, when is it going to warm up? You know what I'm saying? Okay, just a little bit of a tip from me if that's helpful for you. Without further ado, let's jump right into today's podcast. I want to drop you right into contrasting moments that I'm certain that you've experienced. So I want you to think for just a minute about a time when you were really not listened to. Just try to let your brain call up a time when you knew you weren't being heard, someone didn't have the capacity to hold the things that you were saying. Maybe they actually got up and like went into another room. I think that's a little more common if it's a group of people and someone is just like over the conversation or whatever is being said. Someone might get up and go into another room, or maybe it's just a general feeling like you're talking and the person that you're talking to is not engaged at all in the things that you're saying. Or maybe you're not even speaking because you already know you're not being heard. There's no reciprocation of someone hearing the words that are coming out of your mouth. And now I want you just to think about like how that makes you feel. And I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm just trying to give you some contrast here. So just think about the way that you have more self-doubt in a situation like that, where you feel invalidated, you feel little. You know, think about what else you listen to. I genuinely kind of wish that we could be having like an open conversation with people that are all listening to this podcast and we could just chat about it for a moment. Because also to provide you contrast, I want you to think of a time when you were really listened to. that you suddenly picked up and were like, oh, that's a question. That's a question I've never even thought of myself. And you only have the ability to be asking me a question that shows more curiosity about what I've already shared because you were listening to what I said, and how much different that feels than not being listened to. And then really think about the way that you go about life differently, how you feel more alive, how you feel more aware of like this brain of yours and this way that you think, and how you feel like you have access to your creativity or your smarts, right? Like your wit. You just have more access to being aware and living life in a confident mode. Things are very different in the way that you feel. You might even feel, support or love. And it changes your world, and you might not even realize that it came from actually being listened to. So this is really the bulk of what I want to dive into today, because I think that we don't completely understand what we provide in another person when we just listen, when we fully give them our attention and we listen. Do you remember Karen Drucker? We interviewed her on the podcast a few months ago, and she does the music, the very simple music that brings forward messages. Well, she has a song that says, "A woman feels her power when her voice is being heard. So listen." And I'm driving down the street listening to this song, and I'm just like, and true to Karen Drucker style, she's repeating the line over and over and over. A woman feels her power when her voice is being heard. So listen. And I'm thinking about how this is so true. This is so profound, how this has shown up in my life, how I feel powerful when I've been listened to, and how I feel the opposite, completely shut down when I haven't been listened to. I actually really struggle when I don't feel like someone values what I have to say, especially if the person is close to me, right? And that's a very normal thing to feel. Of course, like, we don't want to place our value in other people's hands. And unless we learn the mindfulness abilities and the proper places to seek validation, then it can be like the whole world just crumbles when something like this happens. And we can learn and be a little more shrewd and kind of also be wise about like what the other person has the ability to hear. That's something that I've really had to like understand, especially as I talk about the possibility of your life being happy or your life being better. And sometimes people are so bought in to the belief that that can never be true for their life, that they actually cannot hear my words. They can't hear what I'm saying because their subconscious brain just turns it off. So there's awareness of what another person, is going through as we're talking, so that we can find our validation not just through their actions, right? But what I want this podcast to really be about is highlighting what we do for others when we listen to them versus what happens when we are not being heard, etc. I bring that up so that we can remember how it feels, so that we can get fully embodied and tuned into what that brings into our life, so that we can provide it in others. The second line of that Karen Drucker song says, "The earth will be healed by the women of the world." And it's saying that we can tune into our power by having someone hear us and listen to us. And when we are in tune with our power, we have the ability to heal the world. I mean, those two thoughts together like are so wonderful. I love the quote by Bryant McGill that says, one of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. I was in college and my sister-in-law came over for a visit and she's just chatting with me. She's a great conversationalist. We're just chatting, right? And she starts to ask me about my classes. And I tell her, just kind of like the surface level of what somebody could delineate, like, oh, good, she's learning cool things and yeah. And she's picking up one of my textbooks and she's flipping through it and she's asking me detailed questions about how do you like what you're learning, and are you learning about XYZ, and she just went really deep and wanted to know how it was landing for me. And all of a sudden, the way that I'm relating to that class is different. That same sister-in-law has really encouraged me to be a reader in my life. And we've read books and been a part of book clubs together, etc. But it wasn't until we read a certain book and she said, well, what did you think? Well, oh my word, well, what about this character and that character and all of these things? And all of a sudden, the way that we were talking and the way that she was listening to what my opinions were changed the way I read the books. Just ponder that for a minute. Like, my opinion to her about a book changed the way I read all of the future books. What? It's so neat when we sit and we really just let our hearts be full of this incredible power that we extend. I have another friend who, when I would talk to her on the phone and she would ask me extreme details about how was last week and what happened for you. And she did not settle on, oh, it was great. It was great. Kind of the normal thing. And then reporting on one event. That wasn't enough. She was like, well, how were you feeling during the week? And whatever happened with this situation in your life? And how so-and-so, people that were close to me, how are your kids? How's this going on? And she wanted more. And her theme in life was stay curious, always stay curious about your people. Wow. And suddenly when I would talk to her, I realized, my gosh, like so much is going on in my life. Like I had a lot of cool things happen last week. And then I was suddenly present to my life in ways that I wasn't before her listening. It literally makes me want, I get a little bit emotional and grateful, these incredible feelings in my heart for these people who have stood in those places in my life. And I want to take a little bit of a hard look at what it actually means for a person to be listened to, okay? Beyond what we can just imagine that things are going on through our head right now. Because I'm sure that you're thinking of people who have stood in those places for you. And the whole idea is to start to grasp what we're doing for other people when we do the same thing that has been so well modeled for us. And like the contrast, things that haven't been modeled for us. Let's change that. Let's not repeat the yucky. Let's create something different. So one of the things that happens when you are deeply listened to is that you're given the space to actually process your own thoughts. Have you ever been talking about something with a person, and all of a sudden in the talking, the question that you had is worked out? Like you don't need actually their opinion. All you really need is to hear yourself talking and thinking, because you can find your own solution. There's a psychiatrist named Dr. Mark Goulston, and he emphasizes that listening without an agenda or judgment, that this is what gives people the space to process their own thoughts and to find their own solutions. And that this act alone can help them heal. It can help them grow. It can improve their mental well-being. It's not just about being polite when we listen. It's that we actually change people's internal narrative and we help them find clarity when we do this. Now, there's a bunch of studies that I kind of compiled together and looked at and dove a little bit deeply into the research behind and found really cool things, right? Like just the way that it increases trust and decreases conflict when even just one person in a relationship is committed to listening, because people suddenly feel understood rather than dismissed. And when there's a feeling of that between two people, it changes everything. So there was one study in specifically where it took two strangers, multiple, but two strangers, multiple sets of people, and paired them together. And one person was instructed to talk about something that was deeply meaningful in their life. And the other person was given one rule only, just to listen. Do not fix, do not advise, do not interrupt, just listen. No solutions, no commentary, just presence. Just you're sitting there and eye contact and you're hearing me. The speakers reported feelings like clarity, relief, emotional release, and said, exactly what we talked about before. Like I figured it out while I was talking. And I didn't realize I could feel that way, that validation, until someone listened. Some people even reported that it felt more meaningful than conversations they have had with people they have known for years. Think about that for a moment. Ponder the relationships you have where you might feel supported in other ways, but when you take away and you strip that emotional component, it can override all other areas of support. Everything else that someone does for you, like if they are, say they're very service oriented, and we have to talk ourselves back into like kind of, no, they do love me, they serve me, they have my back in so many ways. When we're not emotionally supported or having that exchange in a relationship, it makes us question and doubt the relationship as a whole. It's very interesting. And it's interesting to ponder the study, because the study was that the people that were listening really only gave them space to process their thoughts. Somehow that space changed everything. They weren't giving them advice. They weren't giving them anything except for the space. So sometimes I think we think, but I don't give good advice, and I don't know all the things, and blah, blah, blah. The whole thing is that you're actually better off when you just listen and you don't say anything, and you have complete confidence that they're going to figure it out, that they're going to be led to exactly what they need. They simply just need someone to hold the space while they go on that journey. The other thing that they found in the studies is that it changes our feelings about ourselves. So our feelings, it wildly validates our identity, our self-worth. It affirms our value. It activates deeper emotional connection with people, between people. And it for sure reduces loneliness and emotional isolation. I can remember having a conversation with one of my kids, and in his friend group, he said that he could be surrounded by these people, but feel so isolated and lonely. And we would talk about how wild it could be, and part of it is that he was this very mature spirit, and he was surrounded with boys that were kind of immature, right? That didn't really know how to be there for a friend or to talk and to communicate beyond anything like, come on, bro, let's go, whatever, stuff like that. But it's interesting that we can be in a crowd and feel alone. That is actually the toughest part of ever feeling loneliness in your life, it's not that when they've studied loneliness, it's not really about like, I'm not around people enough. It's about I'm around people and I still feel lonely because there's no emotional connection. There's no depth. There's no sharing and listening. Paul Tillich said the first duty of love is to listen. And David Osberger said being listened to is so close to being loved that most people cannot tell the difference. Isn't that crazy? Seems so wild to me, especially when you think about people who may have grown up their whole life and weren't listened to. And then suddenly when they're listened to, they can completely just give themselves in that relationship, even if the relationship in other ways isn't healthy, but because they're listened to, they feel complete. And so sometimes I think about that with our kids, like how important it is to really listen actively to them so that it helps create an emotional safety in a safe place so that they know the difference as they're growing up, right? That it's not that they're just going to fall head over heels for someone who finally listens to them. Listening creates people feeling understood, valued, seen. The one thing that I really love is the chemicals, because I love feelings and it's great to try to report on feelings. Not everybody's always in touch with how they feel. And so I think that they can be misreported sometimes. But I love when the chemicals in a study are tested. So what happens in the listener's brain, if you go back to the one where the two strangers were paired together and one was assigned to talk and the other one was assigned to listen. What they found is that they found the neurochemical release that triggered dopamine, endorphins, oxytocin, and these are all chemicals that are the feel-good chemicals, right? The chemicals that create well-being, strengthen bonds, that are called like the love hormone. Those are the chemicals that actually create the good feelings in our life. And if you remember from things we've talked about in the past, when you feel really high and good feelings, it actually negates the low level feelings of our life. So interesting that someone feeling understood and feeling listened to and heard, that alone can create different chemicals in their body. I love thinking about the positive feedback loop that starts, right? And then when we separate with that person that we were listened to, they are kind of on a good roll, if you will say, right? Like they have the good chemicals already going for them with whatever they encounter through the rest of their day. I love thinking about how the chemicals in our body change the way that we experience life. There was an experiment in Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, Supernatural, that was talking a lot about our internal state and how we function after betrayal when our chemicals have a certain makeup. And our chemicals have a certain makeup based on the feelings that we're feeling and the experiences that we're having. They were able to just sniff a little bit of oxytocin during this experiment, and half the people got the placebo. And the experiment was a game that they were playing, and the people that received the oxytocin, they were more apt to be able to play the game while taking sort of more risks, even though that they might have been burned in the past. They were able to sort of reinvest in people through the experiment. And what's really cool to understand inside of that is the way that we're functioning after being betrayed. So when the chemicals in our body are different, we go through life differently. We're not leery of life and on guard and, trying to be defensive. We have more ability to move through life and trust people and love. So for a moment, I just want to look at what gets in the way of listening, because that's kind of important. Because we really do put a lot on our plate to even just be able to accomplish within our own life. We don't always allow a lot of space for things like taking moments to listen to our people. I remember that I was working with a friend, and she had a certain calling in her church, and she was talking to me about how she actually schedules time in her day for something to come up. She became a little bit more flexible so that she could rearrange things if she needed to really be there for people when they needed her. And I thought, that's so interesting. Then it doesn't feel like her day got hijacked if someone needed her. It's literally her role to function the way that she's functioned and to like be there for people. But it is hard if you have a very busy life, right? And you have things scheduled. And so I like thinking about the idea that we got to give ourselves a little bit of space to listen to the people in our life. Give yourself some bumpers of time, right? Like allow yourself to really be more present in the kitchen, maybe when your kid is eating, or when you're driving. Use that time wisely with your kid or your family members or your spouse or whatever. Or if you work at home and you have meetings, maybe schedule a little bit of time in between those meetings so that you can take a break and go be present and look in someone's eyes and ask them questions that allow them the space to talk. Stephen R. Covey teaches that most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. And when you listen just to listen, it changes everything. When you're not thinking about what you need to be saying next, you're not thinking about, and this and that. And maybe after they finish their sentence, just allow a little bit of space. And that's okay. And then respond to the things that they actually said. Krista Tippett said, listening is about being present, not just about being quiet. I love that because it's so different. All of a sudden, you can ask thought-provoking questions that help them on the journey of the things that they're trying to say. I was sitting with my husband's great aunt, and she was listening to my son. We were all having dinner. She was listening to my son, and she was asking, what does he do, and how does he, what is he up to, all these different things in his life. And as he explained what he was doing, her next comment after some space was validating what he was experiencing and what he was doing. And then she said, and how can we support you? That question literally floored me because it just brought up more for him to be able to say, wow, like you can support me in what I'm doing by XYZ. What? Like, doesn't that feel like a space where you're so held? It's so different. Another thing that's interesting about listening is that we can feel bored by what people are saying. We can feel preoccupied by our own thoughts or busy with our own life, what we talked about, right? And it's really crazy to think about how when we listen, it's not for us. And that changes everything. If we approach listening as it being for the person that we're listening to, then it doesn't need to entertain us. It doesn't need to keep our attention and captivate us. It doesn't need to not bore us, so to say. I have a story about my nephew. And when he was a boy, he would prattle on and talk incessantly. I'm not kidding. Like he would go on and on about make-believe stuff. And I can remember feeling taxed at times, being like, yes, okay, And what's really crazy is living some life and watching him grow up. And now He is an adult. He's married with kids. And can I tell you that one of his gifts today is how well he communicates. It is such a gift. The way that he can express himself and the way that he can listen. So I think, what if he would have been shut down as a child over and over and over? How would that change him as an adult? And so sometimes listening is just being silent and letting the other person talk. I like the idea that if you move the letters around, listen and silent are the same, right? They have the same letters inside of them. So it's almost like listen has a little bit of a clue of like, we actually do need to be quiet or silent to listen. And then, like we said already before, it's not just about being silent, it's about being present with the person. But it does take us not talking. And for some of us chatty Cathys, that's like something that we need to actually think about to be able to effectively listen to our people. Carl Rogers said, listening is the art of entering the skin of another person and wearing it for a time. I love that quote. I love being able to ask someone, tell me what it's like to be you. Tell me what your life is like. How is it going? And just to listen. The Chinese symbol for listening is made of two main characters, one that depicts the ears and the other depicting the heart. To really listen, one must not only use both ears, but also the heart. To really listen, be fully present, wholehearted, and offer undivided attention to the person that you're listening to. So I want to ponder the difference between a person that I know was really not listened to when they were growing up. And as she became older, she didn't know how she liked her eggs. That is actually a nod to the show Runaway Bride. You remember at the end of the movie, because she can't really figure out her, she can't really figure out her person. She has a really hard time deciding what is her type and who she really likes, etc. And at the end of the movie, because, Richard Gere I think it's Richard Gere, he finds out that she doesn't even know how she likes her eggs because she spends her whole life sort of doing what other people want and being a people pleaser. And every time she walks down the aisle, she has these realizations of actually, this isn't what I want. So that's why she runs away. But at the end of the movie, remember, he has her taste all of the different ways eggs can be made so she can figure out how she actually likes it. And I think about how when we're listened to, especially when we're young, we are able to look inside of ourselves to see what we like and to allow our voice to be the biggest voice that we listen to when we're making big life choices of who to marry and how many kids to have. And when I think about my own life and I think about how well my parents really listened to me, how they showed so much respect and love and investment in wanting to hear what I had to say, or where I thought, was the lucky spot for fishing, or where I wanted to take a picnic, or, et cetera, et cetera. Just being heard. It helps us to know who we even are. I felt that what I said was important far sooner than when I had something important to say. So I want you to think about that as you go about your week, and maybe you'll have opportunities that you can invest into other people, that when you're listening to them, you are communicating, you matter to me, your story matters. And by me listening to you, I get it that you feel that your story matters. And that's probably the most important part. So think about this as you go through your week and try to find a person or many, but just at least one. And for 5 minutes, intentionally, just allow them to talk. Don't interrupt, don't fix, don't say anything. Just be silent, but be present. Be present and just listen. And watch what happens to them. Watch their face, watch their shoulders, hear the tone in their voice. And all of a sudden, something shifts. And when we become aware of the level of our listening, we also get a little bit giddy inside because we know that we're empowering our people. So I hope that you walk with that this week and know that when you listen, you help others access their power by you simply listening and using the power that you have to listen. And in that, you have more power than you think you do. All right, my friend, I hope that you were able to internalize that listening regulates the nervous system, releases that oxytocin, the feel-good chemicals. It mirrors worth back to another human being. It helps people discover who they are, what they're thinking. It shapes their identity. Being heard becomes confidence later. And listening literally changes the trajectory of a life. I hope that you're walking away with a little bit more awareness of what listening does for your people. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Mindset Check podcast so that you don't miss future episodes like this. Also, if you're getting value from the podcast and would like to give back, rate and review the podcast. It actually does so much for our podcast. It is so helpful, and it really only takes a couple minutes. Also, another reminder that you can support the Mindset Check podcast by shopping on Amazon using our link. And that link is simply www.amazon.com/shop/my-friend-Misha. And that doesn't raise prices for you. It simply gives a kickback to the podcast from the things that you purchase 24 hours from the time that you put that link in. And it's just a way that you can simply be conscious while you're doing what you're already going to be doing, right? Shopping on Amazon. And you can give back to the podcast by doing that. So really a huge thank you. Amazon.com/shop/my-friend-Misha. And before I leave you, I would love to share a quote by Ralph Nichols. He says, "The most basic of all human needs is the need to understand and be understood. The best way to understand people is to listen to them." Until next time, my friend.